Hello, everybody. My name is Debbie Lynn Toomey, Tufts Medical Center's Injury Prevention Coordinator, and you're watching HealthLinks Aging Strong, which is a program, an outreach program, and injury prevention program that aims to educate, empower, and share information that can benefit the older adults. And this program is such a lucky program because we are sponsored by the City of Quincy. Today's guest is Beth Milashevsky. She is the clinical director of Employee Resilience Program at Boston Medical Center. And I got to tell you, I first met her back in June when she pretty much helped lead the group of other injury prevention and violence prevention coordinators in the city of Boston, which I am a part of. And she was brought in because of just the amount of stress that the caregivers, the professional caregivers themselves, are holding on to and can't help but hold on to because of the population we try to serve. It's really important for us to be able to find many different ways to manage our stress. So, Beth, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Debbie, for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yes.
One of the things that I have found in managing stress is the more you understand how your stress response works, the better you're going to be able to manage the symptoms that you're experiencing, and also give yourself the grace that you need to get through the challenging situation. And one way of explaining and understanding your stress response is Dan Siegel's window of tolerance. He came up with this term back in 1999 in his book, The Developing Mind. But it's still such a fantastic way of understanding how our stress response works. So if you think of the window of tolerance, this at any given time, we are going to be in our window of tolerance. And this is basically where we are looking at the world and we're coming from a place of safety. We're not looking at anything in the world in our immediate environment with fear. We're looking at it like, I've got the resources, the skills, the competence and the confidence to manage the challenges in front of me. So sometimes things will get stressful, but you feel like you can manage it, so it's okay. As those challenges start to become more challenging to the point where you're afraid you might not be able to manage it, where you might not have the resources or the skill or the mindset or the knowledge to be able to manage the challenge in front of you, the mind tends to perceive that as a threat. And once we perceive a threat in our environment, the human body instinctually will activate the fight or flight response. And what that means is basically your body, your nervous system gets activated and it's preparing itself to either fight, run away from the threat, or freeze and pull in and hide from the threat. And it stays that way until the threat dissipates. And so some of the symptoms you might experience when you're coming from a place of fear are the following symptoms that you see here. And the beautiful thing that I think is that all humans are hardwired to experience this relatively small cluster of symptoms. And yet in our society, I don't feel like we have a common language to be able to discuss it and talk about it. Ultimately, once you start perceiving a threat in your environment, you're coming from a place of fear. And when you're coming from a place of fear, we start working from the reptilian part of the brain, which means we kind of forget our skill set. We kind of go stupid for all intents and purposes. We kind of forget what we're good at. Our access to language, vocabulary, big picture thinking is drastically reduced. And we're just focused on what do we need to do to mitigate this threat that's right in front of us. So oftentimes, this is when we feel so overwhelmed that we get paralyzed and we kind of feel like we can't do anything. We're like, I have so much to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't even know where to begin. Sometimes when the stress response is activated, we tend to isolate ourselves. A lot of the times we start feeling this sense of shame and these negative thoughts about ourselves and the world around us. One of the common themes is that we have these negative thoughts about ourselves, and they fall into three categories: responsibility, it's my fault, I'm not good enough; power and control, and or safety. And so it's not uncommon when your stress response is activated, you start speaking very negatively about yourself and or the world around you. Nobody knows how to do anything right. Why are the stores still so crowded? What is going on here? Those are symptoms in and of itself of the stress response being activated. The other thing that tends to happen is we question our belief system. We question why we're doing what we're doing. What's really important to us? What are our values? And then some of the physical symptoms we experience tend to be increased heartbeat, shallow breathing, sweaty, dry mouth, tense muscles. That's why our jaw gets tight. We get the tension headache sometimes. Our shoulders are up like this. And we tend to stay like this. And we don't realize that we're staying like this for such a long period of time. So these are the signs and symptoms that your stress response is activated, which means another way of saying that is that you're perceiving a threat in your environment. Now, the human body was not meant to live in this state of dysregulation. It's not meant to live here. So it's very important that once the threat goes away, we come back to a state of being in our window and being regulated. What we have found in doing years of trauma work is that many humans, for whatever reason, when we don't have the opportunity to be able to come back into our window and recover, our nervous system will become dysregulated. And what that means is you're going to experience those cluster of symptoms, but they feel like they never go away. And you're looking around your environment. I'm like, look at this. I'm with my family. I'm with my friends. I'm sitting in a nice, warm, cozy space. Why am I feeling all stressed and dysregulated? Why am I still so upset? And oftentimes it's a good indication that your stress response is dysregulated, that you're outside of your window. And oftentimes it means that there's something that needs to be processed. And unfortunately, what happens is if people stay in this state for a long period of time, over time, their window will become more narrow. And this is when we start seeing signs and symptoms of mental health disorders such as PTSD, depression, and anxiety. But the beautiful thing is that what we have found over the years in doing trauma work is that when we are able to teach somebody, what does it look like when their stress response is dysregulated? How can I tell I'm dysregulated? Let's just use, for example, my shoulders are really, really tight and they're up to my ears. My jaw is really tense. And I can tell that my shoulders are getting like that. If I can recognize that symptom and then interrupt it by doing a shoulder roll, shaking out my arms, doing a neck roll, that will bring me back into the window for just a moment. And then before the next time I get stressed out, and then I come back into the window. And we do that over and over and over again. And what we have found is that's what widens our window. Using our coping mechanisms actually is building resilience. And we've done this 1,000 times. Think sometime in your life where something used to scare you. You would do it. The thoughts of doing it would scare you. You could have increased heartbeat, shallow breathing. You'd almost be shaky, right? And then you try it a few times and you expose yourself to it a few times. And then after a while, you're like, wait a second, this isn't scaring me as much. And then what ends up happening is your brain doesn't even perceive it as a threat. So your stress response isn't activated. This is how we build resilience. Many of us have done this all through past COVID. Think about where we were before COVID, how we endured the COVID pandemic, and how we've come out on the other side. Things that used to cause us distress and anxiety now may not cause us as much stress or anxiety because we've incorporated that experience into our life experience. So this is something I find very, very helpful because I feel like many people who are experiencing distress, loneliness, sadness, they often feel helpless. And that in and of itself is the symptom of the stress response, feeling helpless and overwhelmed. So what can you do about that? What I'd love for people to understand is that if they can recognize these negative symptoms in themselves, they actually have power and control to implement some skills to help them feel better. And so what are those skills? Well, before I move forward, I just want to ask Debbie, do you have any questions or thoughts about what I just shared? Or Dan, do you have any thoughts?
What comes to mind is a lot. And how, as you were talking about how different types of perceived interactions or events can cause our windows to become narrower. I was just even thinking about driving into work today and the traffic, and how I felt like I was starting to get agitated because people were driving a little bit, crazy.
Right.
And I could feel my whole body just becoming really tense. And so I had to kind of become aware of that and take some deep breaths just to kind of, remind myself this is okay as long as I get to work. That's the goal, getting to work in one piece and not getting hit. And I just had to keep talking to myself. I had to talk myself down because I was starting to become more agitated.
Right.
So that's just one little example. But you did share, in one of the prior screens, how when we are under stress, how that negative self-talk starts happening in our mind, which further perpetuates the feelings of stress and overwhelm and agitation, I'm sure, right? Why do you think that happens? Why is it during that time of stress when we need our full faculties the most that sometimes the negative self-talk, like, oh, that was stupid, I can't believe I did that, I do that all the time. Why does that happen, you think?
Well, do you remember how I said when the stress response is activated, we work from the reptilian part of the brain, and we're trying to make sense of a threatening situation. We think that these negative cognitions about ourselves and the world are rooted in the brain's way of trying to have power and control over a situation that we don't have power and control over. So if there's something that's really big going on, and I can say it was my fault, I didn't work fast enough, or I wasn't smart enough, that means I can actually work harder to possibly prevent that event to happen again.
Yeah.
It's not logical, it's not accurate, so to speak. But in the moment, this is the pattern that we've seen when people are in distress. And so it's so important to recognize that when you start noticing, like, they get irritated with themselves, or everybody on the road, nobody knows how to drive, everybody in Boston is horrible, or everybody in Quincy is driving like a maniac, like, and they just go, it's everybody. When you start hearing yourself speak that general language, that's kind of a red flag for you to be like, okay, this might be my stress response. Let me take a deep breath. Let me just shake it out a little bit. This is not an appropriate time to accurately assess how the drivers are in Quincy right now. and kind of give yourself a little bit of a break and allow yourself to get back into that state of regulation. We don't know exactly why, but that is the theory that we're using, is that these negative cognitions tend to be the brain's way of trying to have power and control over a situation that we don't have power and control over. Because sometimes the thought of not having power and control is too scary. And so we're like, okay, we can't think that. So now I'd rather take power and control over this. I'm going to do something to change this.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
It's very, very fascinating. It's just, I've read somewhere we have this negativity bias, and how, we hold on to negative things so much more than the positive experiences. So, and I wonder, when we get stressed, some of those negative experiences, flashbacks or whatever, comes back, and that's when maybe we start catastrophizing. It's like, everybody's a bad driver, it's like,
Right.
Because you recall not just the moment that somebody just cut you off, but the other times in the past when people were driving crazy. So you just basically validated in your own mind everybody drives crazy.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what the brain does to stay safe. It needs to make meaning. And it's like if they think that the drivers in Quincy are bad, then every time you go into Quincy, you're going to be expecting it to be bad. And then when you start seeing the bad drivers, it just validates your perception already. And then it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways.
Yeah.
And that's true with lots of experiences in our lives.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. That's so true. Yeah, very true. This is so fascinating. Thank you.
Sure. No, thank you. Thanks for having me. I love talking about this. I think knowledge is power. And the more you can understand what's happening, the more you're able to mitigate and manage it. I often talk to people and they're like, I go from 0 to 60 in no time. And I don't have any power and control over it. It just happens. And part of what I like to do is to teach people, nope, you do have more power and control over that than you realize. Let's notice when you're at 0 and then when you got to 60, what were some of the things that you started feeling and noticing before that happened? And you'll often see it's those same cluster of symptoms that we just talked about will start to percolate. And as you start noticing those symptoms, that's when you can start using some of your coping mechanisms to be able to mitigate and manage those symptoms to help you get through the challenging time or the threatening time you're experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah. Totally agree. I mean, even when you talked about when we're under stress, we forget our skill sets.
Right.
Just, a few weeks ago, my middle son was rear-ended. Thank goodness both parties were okay, but he was rear-ended in his dream car at night on the way home from work. No. So he was I got a call and he was clearly very upset. I would be too. Right. But, he pretty much knew what to do. But because an event happened and it was unexpected, it was a car accident, his skill set, I had to, keep telling him, okay, take a picture of the dents and make sure you exchange license. And he knew all that, but because something unexpected, he perceived a big stress, which it was, he forgot just the basic things that should be done when, there's a car accident. So it's really fascinating. It doesn't just happen to old people, it happens to everybody.
And that's why we have fire drills. That's why we have those drills on an airplane. Mm-hmm. The more you practice something when you're in your window of tolerance, the more likely you'll remember it when you're outside of your window. And that's why police, fire, special forces, frontline workers, emergency services, they are trained to actually stimulate their stress response, activate their stress response, and then try to train their brain on how to think in spite of the stress response being activated. So that's where a lot of these skills come into play. They do this on a regular basis. And so now it's about crossing those disciplines and being able to share these skills with each other. So then we can use them not only in extreme situations, but also in our daily stressing situations too. It's like we can use the same coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
And so speaking of coping mechanisms, some of the coping mechanisms that I've been teaching at the hospital is really actually not even specific coping mechanisms, but it's a structure to categorize coping mechanisms that many of us already use. There was research done back in 2007 where a group of psychologists went through mass trauma interventions with the idea of trying to understand how do people go through a mass trauma, like a multi-day, multi-victim event, and put one foot in front of the other after they just lost everything. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. It's kind of like how humans are amazingly adaptable and amazingly resilient. But how are they resilient? What are they doing to be able to put one foot in front of the other? And so after going through all of these interventions, they found these 5 elements rose to the top. And then the Navy got a hold of it and called it the 5 C's. And this is part of the stress first aid. which is now actually used with the National Center of PTSD as well. And if you go to their website, you can dig deeper if you're interested in learning more about stress first aid. But basically, if you think of these 5 C's as 5 buckets that hold various types of coping mechanisms. So the 5 coping mechanisms, one of the things that I find interesting is that, like we just said, when the stress response is activated, we forget our skill set. If we have our coping mechanisms stored in these 5 categories, it's easier for us to remember and access our coping mechanisms. So like any other tool belt you have, you're not going to use every tool for every problem. So think of these as 5 different categories of tools or coping mechanisms that you have access to try to manage various challenges and threats in your life. And so cover refers to your environment. Remember how we said when you perceive a threat in your environment, your stress response is instinctually activated. Well, when you step away from that perceived threat or put the perceived threat on hold or remove it from your view, you start to get regulated again. And so one of the ways that we can help ourselves is kind of move away from the threat. So step away from the threat, do something in your immediate environment to promote recovery. So this is where you could go for a walk, put a person on hold, pull over to the side of the road if you're getting really, really stressed out. Maybe getting off of the highway that you're on and taking a back road and just taking a completely different route that you normally take. Changing your immediate environment. That refers to cover. Oftentimes when we're in a stressed environment, the overstimulation is just going to perpetuate the stress response from being activated. So getting yourself into a more regulated environment can help regulate your nervous system. So cover, think of environment. What can you do to promote recovery in your environment? Calm refers to all of those coping mechanisms that you use to regulate your nervous system. Like you said, Debbie, you took a nice big deep breath when you were in the car. We found paced breathing can be very, very helpful. Using your 5 senses, using your sense of sight and naming 5 things you see in your environment. That will start to bring the frontal lobes back online slowly, and it helps ground you. So something as simple as naming 5 things you see: picture, water, phone, tissues, book. You having to look at the object, think of the name of the object, say that name verbally out loud, actually starts distracting the frontal lobe, the brain, from the distress that you're experiencing. So it's a great way to ground yourself in a very simple way. Even if you're like in a crowded mall and you do that, it's kind of slows your mind down a little bit. Moistening your mouth. When the stress response is activated, our digestive system shuts down and our mouth goes dry. When we moisten our mouth with water, mints, gum, it actually turns the digestive system back on, which tells the stress response it can kind of chill out. It pumps the brakes on the stress response. So if we're running away from a bear and drinking water, our stress response is still going to be activated, but it promotes that sense of recovery. So moistening your mouth, having some water, having some gum. Using your sense of smell is another great trick. We have strong body memories associated with our sense of smell. Corporations have been using it for years to help persuade us to buy things and go places. When you walk into a spa, there's a reason why it smells so good. Use that to your advantage. If you can promote things that smell good in your environment, that can actually really help get you back into the moment for just that few seconds until the next stressor comes. And that's the goal here. We want you to get right back into the window just for a moment before you come back out again. So calm basically refers to all of those coping mechanisms: mindfulness, meditation, yoga, anything that you do to help regulate your nervous system. The third C is connect. And this, I think, is absolutely beautiful. One of the biggest buffers that they notice to experiencing distress after a critical incident is connecting with other humans. People who feel like they're not alone in a situation fare better. And so connecting to others in and of itself is a form of recovery. And I know we say that often, but the importance of being able to just reach out to somebody, even if you're volunteering and you don't know them, or you're going through a mall and you just say hi to somebody, recognizing and connecting with other human beings is a form of recovery. It's a great idea to kind of take an inventory of who your friends and family are. Who are the people that you can connect with? Who are the ones that you enjoy, or maybe you haven't touched base with in a while and you want to reconnect with? And allow yourself, maybe make a schedule and allow yourself to reach out to certain people that you might not have seen in a while, or that you have seen and you just want to reconnect with them. That in and of itself can help you feel better. The fourth C is competence. This, I think, is fascinating. Remember how we said when the stress response is activated, we forget our skill set. And sometimes that makes us feel powerless and overwhelmed. We're like, I don't even know where to begin. What they have found is doing a simple task with a beginning, middle, and end can actually promote this sense of efficacy. And efficacy promotes efficacy. So a classic example of this I saw on Instagram the other day. There was a picture of, it looked like it was a video where you could hear piano music playing in the background. And it showed a house, inside a house that was destroyed. It looked like by a tornado, like the roof was torn off. And you could see the kitchen. And as it was panning the kitchen and the living and the dining area, it ends up over in the corner where a man is playing the piano. That is a classic example of competence. He comes back, he just lost everything. And he sits at the piano and plays the piano, plays something that he knows. That ability to be able to go and find a sense of normalcy in the chaos and find a sense that he has autonomy and power and control of being able to play this music, play this instrument that I was able to play before, gives him this sense of efficacy to then be able to put one step in front of the other. We often see that. I don't know if you've ever seen, like after hurricanes, people are like sweeping out a house that's completely destroyed and you know it's going to be gutted anyway. So they do these small, simple tasks, oftentimes just to gain this sense of autonomy, power, and control. So what does that mean for you? Doing simple things, wrapping presents, organizing, folding laundry, emptying the dishwasher. There was one doctor that I worked with during COVID, and he would alphabetize his bookshelf when he would get home. Doing puzzles, playing a musical instrument, anything that gives you a sense of autonomy and competency actually can help you feel better and starts to regulate your nervous system and helps you to kind of get back into your window, so to speak. And then the last C is confidence. And this is the bucket that holds all of the coping mechanisms related to meaning making. How do you restore a sense of self-esteem and hope? How do you bring an understanding and meaning to your life? So this is where a lot of our coping mechanisms that involve our belief in a higher power, our prayers that we would say, a philosophy that we would live by, mentors that we touch base with, and they give us inspiring quotes or mantras to be able to follow. One nurse or one a care coordinator that I was working with the other day, when I brought this up, she said, I'm the voice for the voiceless. And so that was her meaning making for the work that she did. So when the day was really hard, she was able to say, but I'm their voice. I'm the voice for the voiceless. And I thought that that was so powerful. That's an example of confidence. And so when I learned this back in 2020, and I used it often actually during COVID, when I was working with the frontline workers during COVID, I would often, like when I could recognize that I was distressed, I would go down the list and say, okay, covers, or anything I can do in cover. Okay, let me light a candle, let me lower the lights and play some nice music, right? And then calm, let me take a nice deep breath, connect? Is there somebody I can call and talk to? No, it's too late. I can't call anybody right now. Okay. Is there anything, any competence, any skill that I could do? And I actually started reading a book on meditation, and I was reading a couple of skills on how to do that. And then I ended with saying a little prayer. And it was actually very liberating to know that I had power and control, and I had options to choose from when I was feeling so overwhelmed and distressed. And that's what I think is so clever about the 5 C's, is that you can actually, it gives you a sense of power and control when you feel like you're in the midst of chaos. What, any thoughts or questions? What are your thoughts about this? The 5 C's.
So a person does not have to incorporate every single one of these 5 C's, right?
Mm-mm.
Okay. But it's just good for them to know what they are, so that depending on how they're feeling, where they are, maybe time constraints, they at least can pick and choose what they have available for them.
Exactly. Because sometimes, like when I do this with the surgeons, like cover isn't an option. They might be in the middle of surgery. They can't leave. They can't step away. So they have to immediately go to the next one. And so it's really kind of, it's allowing you to coordinate and categorize your coping mechanisms in a way for you to access them relatively quickly, when we know when our mind is distressed, it's not going to be able to do that very easily.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And can you give us an example, say older adults, holiday season, wintertime, how would they be able to incorporate the 5 C's to make sure that their window of tolerance is, as wide open as possible, so that they feel in control? They feel okay, a sense of okayness by not feeling okay.
Right. So this is where a cover would be your environment. Let's think of your environment. When we think of going into the holiday season, oftentimes we think of decorations, lights, all of those things. Sometimes you could be like, well, that's frivolous. That's kind of silly, right? Well, actually, if you're actually, for some people, doing the decorations, putting up the decorations, the holiday decorations actually help them through the holidays. It actually makes them feel like it's more festive, more fun. That is like kind of preparing your environment to make it feel safe and in a way that's comforting and loving and safe. So that's an example. So people are like, why should I put the Christmas decorations up? No one's going to come to visit. Well, it's not about anybody else visiting. It's about you creating a space for yourself that brings you joy. And so that's like an example, something very, very simple like that. Having candles that smell good, connecting to each other. That I can't stress enough the importance of being able to connect with loved ones. And if this is even when, let's say, your loved ones are far away, or there isn't anybody that you feel like you can connect with. This is when you can connect with other volunteer groups or meetup groups, going to the elderly centers or other group centers where there's people that you can meet, volunteering with other people. That would be a fantastic thing. Even if you're around other people, to know that you're not alone. And then again, I think the confidence piece can be very, very helpful for a lot of people. If you think about being alone, and during the holiday season, sometimes that can lead us to this sense of like lack of motivation. I don't want to do anything. Why should I even do anything? What's the point? And sometimes just doing something very, very simple for yourself and or for others, it starts helping you focus your attention away from yourself and putting it on other people. So maybe volunteering with St. Vincent de Paul, maybe wrapping gifts, volunteering to wrap gifts for people who don't have, who are the underserved, right? Being able to do things for others to get yourself out of your own head sometimes can be a wonderful way of navigating the holidays, because it's hard for many, many people. The holidays sometimes shines light on how unhappy we are in our lives right now for whatever reason. And it's okay to feel not okay. And these coping mechanisms, or this category of coping mechanisms, isn't about you not feeling okay anymore, because that's a bigger issue. It's more about how can you recognize when you're not feeling okay? What can you do to help you navigate yourself through that? If that makes sense.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sure. So that is the window of tolerance and the 5 C's to help mitigate and manage stressors coming that you might experience over the holidays. I'm wondering, what coping mechanisms do you use? Oftentimes, this is how we can learn from each other. That when I do this at the hospital, many people are like, oh, I didn't even think of that as a coping mechanism. I never thought of chit-chatting with my office mate as a coping mechanism and a form of recovery. What are some things that you do that help you regulate your nervous system when you find that you're getting distressed?
My go-to would be, if I'm stressed, I immediately try to regulate my breath, because that to me is just the easiest way for me to kind of shift my perception, or my ability to just kind of down regulate my stress. So I would take some nice deep breaths. And as mentioned earlier, when I was driving into work and people were kind of driving a little bit chaotically, I was trying to connect with myself by saying, okay, let's just get to work in one piece. People will do this. Just drive extra careful, because I couldn't connect with anybody. As far as cover and safety, I couldn't really do anything because I was in my car. And confidence, I was saying to myself, okay, you're a good driver. You got this. Just keep, just have spatial awareness and just make sure that nobody's coming too close. And confidence, as far as that goes, is just really trying to, pray that I'll get to work in one piece. And also know that, it's just, I'll get there in due time, and it's just, all is well. I'm not really in as much rush as the people who are, trying to cut me. So.
Right. It's interesting. You said something earlier about catastrophizing, and how sometimes people, especially with the holidays, it feels like there's so much to be done, and we have so much to do, and I'm never going to be able to get it all done. Or with the bad weather coming and the snow is coming, are we going to be able to, is the storm going to hit us in such a way that we're not going to feel safe and be safe? One of the things that I find to be extremely helpful, and I think this falls under the competence bucket, is asking yourself, what do I have power and control over? So when you start feeling yourself catastrophizing and worrying about, well, I can't get this done. I'm not going to get this done. What do you have power and control of? And then let go of the rest and really start allowing yourself to focus on that. Okay, I don't have power and control over the storm coming, but I do have power and control over making sure that I have my house all lined up. We've got groceries, we have our medication, I have candles, and I have flashlights just in case we lose power. And I have my loved ones' numbers just in case I need to get in touch with somebody. I'm doing everything that I can do to prepare for this. And now, yes, I'm nervous and scared. So let's tap into another coping mechanism. If I play an instrument, if I knit, if I crochet, I can do something like that to help me manage the distressing feelings that you might be feeling. But it's also with your brain trying to control the environment that you're in and recognizing what your power and control over.
I heard the term amygdala hijacked, or your amygdala will hijack you.
Right.
And how it can really keep you from thinking, having your logical brain to work for you. Instead, it just kind of paralyzes you, right?
Right.
Or maybe make you more agitated. Can you speak a little bit more about that part of our brain, the amygdala? Why does it do that?
Well, so that's another way of saying we're outside of our window. So basically, the amygdala hijack is what they say is really your stress response is being activated and your body is hardwired to do what it needs to do to protect itself. And so all what that means is that you're experiencing this cluster of symptoms and you're experiencing them instinctually. That's why they call it hijacking, is because you don't get to choose. I don't think I'm going to turn my stress response on today. Like, I don't want that. I don't want that to bother me. So I'm not. Like, we're hardwired. When we see a perceived threat, the adrenaline gets turned on and it will start to do, our body will do what it needs to do to stay safe. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that we used to do thousands of years ago may not be very productive for us right now, but we are adapting and learning how to adapt with that. And that's why knowing what these symptoms are and recognizing these symptoms, then you can start working with your own body to help regulate your nervous system. So even knowing, okay, my brain has been hijacked. I can't think big picture. I'm getting really hyper focused. What can I do to bring my brain back online? Let me name 5 things in the room that I see. That's an example of trying to bring the amygdala back on, like bring the frontal lobes back online, right? You're regulating your nervous system to a certain degree. And that's what we do all the time. It's a constant balance of, am I safe? Am I not safe? Am I safe? Am I not safe? What am I going to do to help me feel safe? How do I make sure I can maintain that safety? We're constantly trying to do that.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because it's not just a one-time deal and then there you go, you take care of yourself, you take some nice deep breaths and off you go, and the world is right again. That is so true. That is so true, because just never know. You never know what unfolds during the day. You never know what you hear in the news. Working in the hospital, you never know what is going to face you in your shift. Right? I mean, right. I remember when I used to work as a bedside nurse a long time ago, I would, as soon as I leave the locker room, I put my stuff away, leave the locker room. Upon entering the unit that I'm working on, a part of me is like, okay, what's going to hit me today? You just never know. Is it going to be, are you going to have a really heavy and intense assignment? Do you need to stay an extra 8 hours because somebody called in sick? On top of that, are you in charge? And is there somebody who's really agitated? And, are we short staffed? All these different things that we're constantly going in and out of, trying to take care of it, find a sense of control, using your, skill sets to help you manage your stress. But I just remember how sometimes I would feel that my heart is on my throat.
Yeah.
Right. So I'd be like, okay, right. Take a deep breath, one step at a time. Let's talk to, I'm in charge. Okay, what do I need to do to make sure that everybody's safe, including me and the nurses that I'm supposed to be helping this shift?
Right. And so that's an example of you being on your regulatory boundary, right? So like your stress response is starting to get activated. You recognize it. So now I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to focus on what I have power and control over. I'm going to work with my team, and you're going to come back into the window. And then the next stressor happens, and then you come back and you do it over and over and over again. And that's what actually builds your sense of resilience over time. And so it really is, knowledge is power. The more you are aware of the stressors you're exposed to, and know what coping mechanisms work for you to manage those symptoms, the better off you'll be. Yeah. And to understand that those symptoms are instinctual. It's not a reflection of you not being strong enough or smart enough or good enough. You are a human being. And as a human being, when you are faced with a perceived threat, your stress response is instinctually activated. When we talk about people with anxiety disorders, all that means is their perception of their environment, basically their indicator that there is a threat in the environment is faulty. So they're having a false alarm. So their stress response gets activated when there is no perceived threat. So what's happening is their body, for all intents purposes, is acting as if there's an oncoming train and they're standing right on the tracks, but there's no train coming. And so then it can be really, really confusing because you're like, why is my body acting this way? And I'm scared and I'm feeling all of these big, big feelings, but there's no trigger to cause it. And that's what I'd love for you to understand is that, okay, your body is setting off a false alarm. It thinks that there is some kind of threat in your environment. And using many of these techniques can be helpful to help you regulate your nervous system again. Actually, that's where a lot of these little techniques come from. When I'm in private practice, that's what I use with people. When they're in the midst of a panic attack, we go through many of those steps that I talked to you about, having something to smell, drinking some water, taking a deep breath, rolling your shoulders, shaking it out, naming 5 things you see in the room. What do you hear? So like using your senses to help regulate your nervous system.
Mm-hmm. My goodness. So there's so many different thoughts and questions are just running in my mind. The first one is Andrew Huberman, who is a researcher and also ophthalmologist, neurologist. One of the things that he talks about is if you are in a state where your mind is ruling you, and it's just like, this negative self-talk or whatever it is, and you just can't stop it. One of the best ways to do that is to do something with your body. Mm-hmm. Right. So like you mentioned, using your 5 senses, what do you see? What do you smell? What can you touch? What can you taste? Maybe shaking it out or going out for a walk. Right. So all these different things, connecting with other people because we're human beings. Right. So finding that trusted someone. It's just so important how, we in our own mind and body self have the ability, the capabilities to regulate ourselves.
Yes.
But we forget that. And that's why I wanted so much for you to come on this program, just to really remind us of what we already know. And maybe keeping that top of mind, we need to find a sense of balance and control. And there's just so much power in having that little micro moment of control to help you take that next breath, that next step.
And having reminders in your environment. Like as you say that, we do forget and we get sucked into the energy of the day, whatever it is. And we end up doing so many things without necessarily being mindful or thinking of it. And it's so easy to get sucked into a hectic pace. And so having reminders, like sometimes that's why having a pleasant environment can help slow you down and just remind yourself, okay, wait a second, let's take a breath, let's breathe. Having a little Post-it note on your bathroom mirror, breathe, and reminding yourself to breathe. I often will say to the hospital workers, can you pair a micro practice with something that you already do at work? So take a deep breath every time you log into the computer. One of the nurses uses her vacation destination as her password. Is there a way that you can, every time you enter a room, you can kind of recognize, I'm going to take a nice deep breath? Or with some of the doctors, I'll say, every time you walk into the room to meet a new patient, recognize their eye color. Just being really, really mindful of your environment can really kind of help you get grounded and not get swept away or hijacked, so to speak.
Yeah. As I mentioned to you that I was away, I was out of state, and my husband and I were staying in one of the hotels. And here we were getting in line for breakfast for our coffee. And they had the carafes, the coffee and the hot water and whatnot. Across each carafe is the word breathe. Breathe, breathe. And I was just like,
Oh, that's
when I
great.
read it, I can't help but follow the direction. It's like,
Right. Right.
not only am I about to get my hot cup of coffee for the morning, but the word says breathe, so I have to breathe, right?
Right.
I
Right.
love that. It was
Right.
just so cool.
And it's those little reminders. And that's why when you go back to any type of religion, we've got those patterns of behaviors. We've got the traditions in place to help you to remember, which is so fascinating. So can you incorporate certain traditions for yourself or structure some sense of have a regular habits to help remind you of these coping mechanisms regularly throughout the day? That's like having a gratitude journal. Like at the end of the night, can you write down 5 things that you were grateful for the day? When you wake up in the morning, can you say your morning, what are you grateful for? What are you looking forward to? Or what's your intention for the day? Those little small steps really help ground you for the rest of the day.
I so agree. I've been teaching mindfulness at the community center, and that's just one of the practices that I would share with them, the gratitude practice, and how it's really great to do it at night. And research has shown it helps with sleep, but because it ends the day with a positive. And how really important it is. And so associating that or pairing that new habit with something, a routine. So when I used to do my gratitude journal, I would put my gratitude journal on top of my pillow with a pen. The journal already is open. So it's almost like when I go to bed, it was almost like a friend waiting for me. So, I had to write down or share with my friend the 5 things that I noted that day. And it did make me feel good. And so falling asleep, it was just a nicer slumber. And I woke up thinking, okay, what else can I be grateful for today? So that was my mind. That was my guiding star for that day, is just, okay, what other good things can I be grateful for today? So it made for a nice perception. Nice. And I was able to feel that the stress was much lower because I was looking for the good instead of the not so good.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Right. It's so powerful. Can you share with us a breathing technique that you like to share with people? Like, say you have maybe a nurse or a doctor at Boston Medical Center, and they needed to see you because they just had such a bad shift. What type of breathing exercise is your typical go-to when new?
My typical go-to one is the 4 square breathing. But I do want to preface, sometimes when people are really, really, really dysregulated, breathing can be hard. So sometimes having them do a paced counting breathing can be too difficult for them. And that's okay. So I'm just saying that for some people who are like, I try to do these and I lose track of counting. That's okay. Sometimes you physically need to move first before you can then actually start catching your breath, so to speak. But if there's somebody in a space where they're able to do this, oftentimes I'll have them breathe in through their nose for a set number. Let's just start with a low, like 2 or 3. So you breathe in for 3, pause for 3, exhale for 3, pause for 3. And we do that a few times. And when you first start practicing it, it can be a little bit confusing. Sometimes it's like, oh, I lost count. Did I go in for 3 and out for 4? And it gets a little bit confusing. Once you start practicing it, though, it becomes something of like a rhythm that you start to fall into. And one of the things that I really noticed, something happens during that pause when you're holding and it's just there's something that I just feel my whole body just kind of feels so much better in those little moments of the pause. And so sometimes I'll breathe in for 4, pause for 4, exhale for 4, pause for 4. So that's kind of my go-to is the 4 square breathing.
Can you give us like 1 or 2 key takeaways that you want the viewers to be able to come away with? You shared a lot and such great information, very practical and pertinent information. What can you share? One or two things that you feel is going to be like, will encapsulate what you covered today.
I think the biggest takeaway is please be gentle with yourself.
Mhm.
I think one of those negative cognitions can be really hard. And we tend to beat ourselves up. Why am I so upset? Why this is the best time of the year? Why am I so lonely? I'm lucky I'm not living on the street, blah, 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 blah. And we say all these harsh, hard things to ourselves. Try to be gentle with yourself and accept where you are and what you're feeling. 9 times out of 10, we often don't like what we're feeling. I'm sad, but I don't want to be feeling sad. Or I'm lonely, but I don't want to be feeling lonely. And then we get mad at ourselves for feeling lonely. And that doesn't help. So if you can recognize, yes, I'm lonely. I wish I wasn't lonely right now. This is tough. I didn't think it was going to feel this way. And now what can I do to help myself right now? And being gentle with yourself, regardless of how good or how bad you feel. Because it's part of being human, is living through these emotions and having these various experiences.
Wow, thank you. That's so powerful. That's so powerful. You basically shared elements of mindfulness and self-compassion there, and just really being able to just, giving yourself permission to be human.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Giving yourself permission to be human, and just to really to lean into what you're feeling.
Right.
To lean into it instead of just like, punishing yourself for feeling that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. Now, Beth, if anybody has any other questions, how can people best get in touch with you as far as, learning a little bit more about the window of tolerance, maybe stress first aid, or maybe what resources do you think would be best for people who want to learn a little bit more?
The National Center of PTSD has the stress first aid training on there, in depth. So there's tons of information if you want to dig deeper and learn more about that. I think feel free, you can email me. My name is up there, Beth Milashevsky@bmc.org. Feel free, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me there, and I'd be happy to answer any further questions. And I think just knowing your local resources can be very, very helpful. Knowing what's available in your local resources can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. And for older adults, it could be senior centers.
Exactly.
The senior centers, exactly. Or if you're a spiritual person, going to church.
Or your mosque or your temple. Exactly.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, definitely just don't forget what you have available. Is maybe waiting for you to, invite you in to help you be able to, manage whatever it is that's going on in your life right now. So yes, definitely.
And remember, you're not alone, right? You're not alone. Even when you're feeling lonely, there are other people who are probably feeling that way too. And so when you go out, you're actually probably helping somebody else feel a little less lonely too.
Thank you so much, Beth. And I want to thank the Quincy Health Department for continuing to support this program, Health Links, Aging Strong.